Hey, what's going on, guys? It's me, Jay. I wanted to talk a little bit about, you know, today is a very crazy day as far as wrestling history because, um, well, today was the day that WCW officially died. Now, the last broadcast, the simulcast for WCW, didn't air until the 26th of March, 2001. I'll never forget where I was when I heard the news. I was I had quit watching WCW honestly. Um, you know, in the spring of 1999, so I missed the entire year of 2000. Since gone back and watched it on the network, and it was really brutal. Like WCW lacked direction in the year 2000. It was just some brutal shit. But by the spring of 1999, like when they turned Hulk Hogan babyface, like I did see when Hulk Hogan came back in the red and yellow in that tag team match, in that three-way tag, that six-man tag with him, Sting, and Goldberg versus Rick Steiner, Kevin Nash, and Sid. I did watch that. That was like in August, leading up to the Road Wild match with Kevin Nash and him. I saw that, but prior to that, like when they turned Hulk Hogan uh, good at Uncensored 99, when they did a double turn with him and Ric Flair, and then DDP won the title in the four way. I'm like, I'm done with this shit. Like they going nowhere because 1999 was all over the place. They start off 1999, the first Nitro of 1999 with the finger poke of doom, right? A reunion of the NWO, the two NWOs, whatchamacallit NWO, the Wolfpack NWO and the NWO Hollywood reunion where they fool Goldberg. And then Goldberg comes out, he gets beaten up by Lex Luger. Lex Luger turns heel, Buff Bagwell, Scott Hall, and you have the NWO Elite. And then you have the B team guys that were the NWO, the leftover from NWO Hollywood. They kicked Kurt Hennig out of the NWO. After that, and then the Giant and Kevin Nash have their match. And the Giants, it's a loser leaves town match, and the Giant loses because the Giant's about to go to WWE. When the Giant made the jump to WWE, I'm like, it's a wrap, guys. You know what I mean? Like, it was just all over the fucking place, WCW in 1999. So that's when I gave up. But WCW had some really good memories, some really good times, especially from 1995 to 1999 or 2000. You know what I mean? But that was that's when it was announced, David. I mentioned that. March 26th. That's when it was announced. But this was the day the sale was made. This was the day the sale was made. It was first announced on the internet. And then that's when the simulcast happened. And all of a sudden, Vince McMahon is standing there talking about, I have WCW in the palm of my hand. And it was exciting because we didn't know we did 25 years now, quarter of a century. We didn't know what was going to happen. Oh yeah, David says he's the greatest WCW champion of all time. We didn't know what was going to happen, man. For years, even before the Monday Night Wars. The Monday Night Wars began officially on September the 11th, 1995. We didn't know, but before the Monday Night Wars, we always wished that WCW and the WWF would get together for a big event, and we would see the Titans clash, before the Monday Night Wars even. Like when in 93, when I started watching WCW, and Vader was the champion of WCW, and Yokozuna was the champion of WWF. we all wished that to happen. And then, like, later when Hogan made the jump and he came to WCW, and then he had the match with Flair, which was a dream match in the 80s. You know what I mean? And he had the match with Flair, Bash at the Beach 94. And then he became the champion, and Bret Hart became the champion of WWF at WrestleMania 10, which celebrated its anniversary last year. And then, yesterday and shit. So for years, we all dreamed of that. So when it was going to finally happen, and it was going to be able to happen because WWF now controlled WCW, and then ECW went out of business not so long after. So it's like, damn, Vince McMahon owns the entire wrestling world. What's he going to do with it? And unfortunately, he didn't do much with it. The story behind it, though, is very interesting. Read Guy Evans's book, Nitro, that came out a couple of years ago about the sale of WCW. What basically happened was there was a merger between AOL and Time Warner, right? And basically, Ted Turner was no longer in charge of his own company. And since he bought WCW in 1988 from Jim Crockett. We talked about this a lot, that you got to start the story way back in 1984. 1984, Vince McMahon is doing the national expansion, and he wants to, move into the Georgia territory because Georgia Championship Wrestling had national television before on TBS before anybody, before him, right? In the early 1970s. So he's already on USA Network. He's taken Joe Blanchard of Southwest Championship Wrestling, Tully Blanchard's father's spot on USA Network in 1983, moving the WWF programming from HBO to USA Network. So now he wants to branch out and he wants to buy Georgia Championship Wrestling. Now there's a consortium in Georgia Championship Wrestling because, you have Ole Anderson, you have Jim Barnett, you have Jerry Oates, a bunch of wrestlers, and the Briscoe brothers, Jack and Jerry. So they all sell their shares. I know. They rest in peace to WCW. They all sell their shares to Vince McMahon. And all of a sudden, people that are used to seeing Gordon Soley and people that are used to seeing, Georgia Championship Wrestling, all of a sudden now they see Vince McMahon. So he tells Ted Turner, he's like, I'm going to give you an original TV show, with original matches and everything. I know. I remember that too. I'm going to give you an original TV show with original matches. He doesn't do it. So Ted Turner kicks him off the station, and he sells what was then WCW, Georgia Championship Wrestling, to Jim Crockett. And Jim Crockett owns it for years, a few years until 1988 when Crockett himself goes out of business and Ted Turner buys it. And that's when they rename it from, obviously, Jim Crockett Promotions to World Championship Wrestling. And that's the birth of WCW. And Vince McMahon's last words to Jim Crockett, you'll choke on that million. But, and Jim Crockett, who was the owner of Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling, he consolidates that with Georgia. But when Ted Turner buys it, he doesn't know how to run the shit. So they bring in a bunch of people. It was like a revolving door in the late 80s and early 90s with so many people until Eric Bischoff took control in 1993. And then Eric Bischoff started making changes, bring in Hulk Hogan, bring in the Macho Man, starting Nitro, and eventually starting the NWO, and started kicking Vince McMahon's ass for 83 weeks. on Monday Night Nitro. And I think it was I think I think it was the fact that Eric Bischoff was kind of envious that he never got hired from the WWF because he auditioned for the WWF in 1991 when AWA, the company that he was working for at the time, closed, and he never got the job. You know what I mean? So when he went to go work for WCW, he was kind of jealous. You know what I mean? So he wanted to really put Vince McMahon out of business, and he almost did. But what changed Vince McMahon's fortunes was that Texas Rattlesnake, Stone Cold Steve Austin. You know, when Stone Cold Steve Austin got hot, there was no stopping him. He was a juggernaut. But in a way, WCW was always doomed because the people at TBS and the Turner people, they never wanted professional wrestling. Ted Turner liked professional wrestling. He felt that professional wrestling brought him to the dance in the 70s. That and the Andy Griffin show and Braves baseball was what started the superstation TBS, so he always wanted to keep it on. But the other people, they didn't want wrestling. They never liked wrestling. They considered it lowbrow. They considered it too country bumpkinish, and they wanted to get rid of it. But Ted Turner just kept patronizing it, especially in 95 when he decided to move it from just TBS 605, which had been the time slot forever, to prime time on Monday nights. Eric Bischoff goes in there. We know the story. Eric Bischoff goes in there. He wants to talk about international distribution to China. And then Ted Turner says to him, well, what do we got to do to compete with WWE? And he says, well, I'm on every Saturday at 6:05. WWE's on prime time. And then he looks over at Scott Sasser, who's the head of TBS at the time. Scott Sasser is famous for turning around Cartoon Network, buying up all those classic Hanna. Right, exactly. Shinobi is exactly right. Scott Sasser was that guy, famous for Cartoon Network, but he looks over at Scott Sasser and says, well, give Eric an hour. Eric always tells the story wrong. They say give Eric 2 hours, but really Nitro started off as 1 hour. He said, put him on prime time, and people are shocked at TNT because TNT, they marketed themselves as upper class, chic, like Shinobi's saying. You know what I mean? Like, movies for guys who like movies and NBA basketball and just, urban and sophisticated. They want nothing to do with wrestling. Because again, wrestling is exactly Jamie Kellner. Wrestling is neither fish nor fowl, like Jim Cornette always says. And like I say, it's not really sports because it's scripted, but it's not really scripted entertainment because wrestlers are not actors, they're wrestlers, And it was one thing for it to be buried away on TBS, where nobody ever talked about it. But on prime time, they figure, hey, they could be airing Civil War movies then. They could be airing Holocaust movies. They could be airing some of the greatest television that TNT was putting out. Or they could be airing, NBA games or whatever, right? They don't need this BS that they consider as BS. You know what I mean? Like, and also what Shinobi's saying as a part of it too, when Jamie Kellner came in, he wanted to market the station to females, to a female demographic, like kind of like CW, right? So Of course, wrestling is not going to fit on that. But in the end, I always say that if WCW was doing the numbers that WC in yeah, Carney. If WCW was doing the numbers that WCW in 2001, what WCW was doing in 97, 98, there was no way, even if he hated wrestling, there was no way they were going to ever shut it off. But it clearly wasn't, because of the booking. So part of it is the booking, but part of it is Jamie Kellner. There's no justification. I mean, if they were doing the numbers, there wouldn't have been a justification for taking it off the air, right? But they weren't doing those numbers anymore. You know what I mean? But if the booking had been better, they could have been doing those numbers. And it's just sad because in the history of WCW, when you look back, they really only had 2 years of good programming. Well, 2.5, half of 96. Because business. Okay, maybe they would have still. You're probably right, though, Shinobi. Yeah, it was a liability. You're probably right. But if they were doing the numbers, another company would have wanted to pick them up. But they weren't. Why didn't anybody? That was the problem. When Eric Bischoff with Fusion Media wanted to buy it, no company would pick it up. And it became a problem with Vince as well. Because what Vince wanted to do was he wanted to run them as two separate products. But he had just, in 2000, Vince had just made the move from USA Network, where they've been with, like I said, since the early 80s. They made the move to Spike TV, which was TNN at the time. And TNN didn't want to pick it up because he was going to do. Yeah, I heard that too. I heard that actually on David Bixenspan's Patreon channel. David Bixenspan. But Vince had the plan to run WCW, run Raw on like a Tuesday, and WCW on a Monday on different networks. You know what I mean? But that fell through because Viacom and all their other channels were like, well, we have enough wrestling. We have the good wrestling. Why would we want this dead wrestling product? You know what I mean? So that fell through. So they had to do what they had to do. And then they didn't have the contracts of the wrestlers that we loved that made up WCW. And then Bruce Pritchard recently on his podcast revealed that WWE wasn't even interested in any of the contracts. You know what I mean? Of Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, Lex Luger, Goldberg, Sting, Ric Flair, any of these traditional WCW guys that we liked during the Monday Night Wars, they weren't even interested in these guys. You know what I mean? So they were just interested in the intellectual properties, and that was it. And the IP in the library. And that sucks. You know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's a thing too. Yeah, but I guess Pritchard is never gonna admit that they couldn't afford it because like it would have caused locker room disruption or whatever. But yeah, the XFL, it was bad timing. But um, here's what I would have did. Why did the invasion store? They got the guys anyway. Flair came over the night after. Luger, I mean not Luger, but Nash, Hall, and Hogan came over, early in 2002. Why didn't they just keep the invasions? Right, exactly. Right. Why didn't they just keep the invasion storyline going until they got the contracts? Storylines can last 2 or 3 years. Look at the bloodline. Technically, if you count My Family Treaty, MFT, the bloodline storyline is still going on now. You know what I mean? Many people don't consider that the bloodline, but still, like, and that started when? Late in 2020? Like, look at how long the NWO went on. Look how long. Like, realistically, you can't keep a storyline going for a couple of years. They didn't even keep it going for a year. I know. Like, okay, you couldn't afford the guys, but the guys came over anyway. Rey Mysterio came there in 2002. NWO came there in 2002. Goldberg came in 03. You know what I mean? Sting probably was never going to come because of the way they made the WCW guys look, right? And then unfortunately, Sting comes years later, and the very thing he feared would happen actually happened. you know, like maybe Sting should have stayed away forever. Vince is gone now, so that fear of that happening with MJF. That's true. That's a true rumor. He has confirmed that he wanted because Brett hadn't had his stroke yet, so he wanted Brett to come back. This was his plan. I read in his book. He wanted Brett to come back and Brett to lead the invasion. To get revenge on uh, um on Vince from Montreal. And by leading a WCW invasion. It could have worked, but I don't see Brett as the guy that represents WCW. Like, I get the whole Montreal angle, but like the guy leading the WCW invasion should have been Ric Flair. Like, that should have been like Ric Flair should have been the guy leading the WCW invasion. Like, nobody gets it right. I wrote my own version of it. Where they had the guys they had, but then it culminates in a War Games with the real guys like Hogan, the NWO, Austin, The Rock, Foley, and it culminates in a War Games because WCW says, I know the one way to beat WWF in a match that they don't know anything about, a War Games match. That was my ending where I wrote my own. Cornette did one on kayfabe commentaries, but his had like Terry Funk and like bullshit like that. These guys that he was talking about, they didn't even matter in the Monday Night Wars, really. like Terry Funk, like that's your culmination match. To me, if it didn't have Goldberg versus Stone Cold Steve Austin, to me it wasn't real. And like that had to be in the cards there somewhere. Like, yeah, Jim Cornette, we see We see why all your companies went out of business. Like Terry Funk was completely irrelevant. A billion times. It already happened a billion. Like Funk, I mean, Foley versus Rock was all throughout 1999. Like he was thinking more NWA, WWF. Like when I think of WCW, I think of the Monday Night Wars people. Like my fantasy war games team would have been Goldberg, Sting, and the NWO versus Stone Cold Rock and DX. As and then you have like Bischoff and and McMahon in each corner. And I don't know, maybe somehow I fit Taker in there. I don't know. Like Taker and Sting had to happen too, or else it doesn't. Like you match the people up with the. You do it the way that PWI was doing it when the Monday Night Wars were going on. You know what I mean? Like, and then you put the NWO in it later. Like things get so bad for the WCW team that they have to call in the NWO. They have to do what they didn't want to do. You know what I mean? The very thing that destroyed WWF, the thing that destroyed WCW, they have to call them out of retirement. You know what I mean? They have to. They have no other choice because they're losing so badly to the WWF guys. You know, so they have to call in the heavy hitters. But what you don't do is you don't announce that the NWO is coming. You have the NWO show up through the audience. You have the NWO show up by surprise. And to me, ECW is not even a factor. Like the fact that they brought ECW into the mix, like, come on, really? You know, I mean, it made for a cool moment. I liked the moment. I'm not gonna lie. When Heyman got up and said, "The invasion has now been taken to the extreme," I was like, "Oh shit!" But half of the ECW guys were already in WWF. Like, and you didn't have Shane Douglas, and you didn't have the Sandman. You know what I mean? Like, if you're gonna do ECW, you got to do those guys. You know what I mean? And then what made the invasion angle even worse? Okay, you have these jabronis, but you don't even build the people that you do have up to be stars. You make them even worse jabronis than they already are. You know, like it just, and then a double Austin turn, like Austin joining the Alliance, like it made no sense. The storyline was the worst storyline in wrestling history. I know. It was pretty weird because it's like it ended up where Angle is taking on Stone Cold Steve Austin, and it was a good match, but Stone Cold Steve Austin, why would he kayfabe? Why would Stone Cold Steve Austin join WCW, the company that fired him? You know what I mean? Like just to get back at Vince because Vince, what, liked Kurt Angle better? like on some bitch shit, like some real bitch shit, like something that a girl would do. Oh, like, oh, she's being friends with her now, so I'm gonna do something to this girl to get back at her. I know. Like, bad enough you turned them heel at WrestleMania. That the two punch combination of turning Austin heel at WrestleMania and then turning him heel again in the stupid invasion angle and how the invasion angle was botched, that killed professional wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, and wrestling has never really recovered. They talk about, oh, the boom period during the Bloodline storyline. Bullshit. Wrestling has never really recovered from the time that Stone Cold Steve Austin turned heel twice in 1 year in 2001. There's never been another boom period. Ever. You know, it came close when Triple H first took over, but you know what I mean? It wasn't anything like we experienced in our era. Right, exactly. Me neither. Me neither. And then moving it to Netflix makes it even worse because, I mean, why is it appointment television when I could just stream it later on? you know, you know, like if I was a kid now, when I was a kid, bro, I, I I couldn't wait to do exactly $30 for a crap. I couldn't wait to do my homework and fucking get done doing my homework to watch flip between the channels of Raw and Monday Nitro. You know what I'm saying? Like that was the highlight of my week. I couldn't wait to see what company was going to do, which company was going to outdo the other. You know what I mean? Like that's how wrestling was truly pop culture. The way Marvel is now with the Marvel movies, right? That's the way wrestling was back then. You know what I'm saying? But in a television type way instead of movies. You know, you know what I mean? Like, I mean, both companies were on fire. You would go to school and people would know. People would, and it was so weird for me because I started watching in 1990, and in 19. Yeah, me too. My biggest memory, anything NWO and Sting versus Sting related. That whole year, 97. Man, you don't know, man. I was the biggest NWO mark, but I did like Sting. At the same time, I kind of rooted for both. I was a huge NWO mark. But what I was saying was Shinobi was I started watching in 1990. And in 1990, wrestling was on the downturn from the 80s boom, right? And then by 93, 94, 95, nobody was watching wrestling. Like I used to get made fun of for being a wrestling fan in 93, 94, and 95. But then something weird happened in 96. Then all of a sudden, these kids that were making fun of me by the time sixth grade hit are now talking about wrestling like these quote unquote cool kids. And I'm like, what? I Oh no, yeah, no, I'm getting there. You know, and then it's like, I'm like, what? You know what I mean? Like, when is this? Why? How is this happening? You know, me, the dork that likes wrestling, fake wrestling, and all of a sudden now my dorky hobby is being talked about like it's fucking pop culture. You know what I mean? Like, it was pretty weird. You know what I mean? Like, must be how comic book nerds feel now. You know what I mean? Like their thing that nobody cared about 10 or 15 years ago. Everybody talks about Marvel now, and these hot chicks one don't mind going out on dates to see Marvel movies and shit. You know, you know what I mean? Like, no, I wasn't. I stopped watching in '99. I stopped before you, because the NWO was what brought me in. Like really glued me to WCW. I used to like both, but the NWO really got me going because it felt real. You know what I mean? Like NWO felt real. Like I knew wrestling was fake, right? When I was like, by the time Lex Luger didn't win the WWF Championship at SummerSlam '93, I'm like, oh, this shit is fake. Because if it were real, he would have at least tried to get Yokozuna back in the ring instead of winning on a countout. But what the NWO did was they were like, oh, yeah, all that other shit is fake, but this is somehow real because look, he's in street clothes, and they actually act scared when when he's around. You got Bobby Heenan running off, and Bobby Heenan would play it off so well that it would be like Bobby Heenan was actually scared when the NWO would come. Like, Tony, I don't know what's going on. You know what I mean? Like anything can happen. You know what I mean? Like, and then they would stay silent. Like usually when something scripted happens in wrestling, the announcers all, oh my God, look at this. You know what I mean? Like really feeding into it. But when the NWO came in, they acted like just quiet, just dead silence. You know what I mean? And that reeled me in. And then when Hogan turned heel, man, that just blew the top. That was one of my favorite moments during the Monday Night Wars, when Hogan turned heel. But my favorite, I used to like when they would go to Shinobi. I used to like when they would go to spring break, and there'd be that pool atmosphere. My favorite episode, besides the Georgia Dome, when they went to the Georgia Dome in '98 when Goldberg won the championship, was it was a rare Monday Nitro. It was Monday Nitro in '97, where it was the Monday Nitro before Uncensored. They're about to go, and they're in Club La Villa that night. And it's like Sting almost pretends to join the NWO. And like he actually, the real Sting, Steve Borden, not the NWO Sting, comes out with the NWO. And he's there when Hogan's cutting a promo on Roddy Piper and the Horsemen. I really like that one for some reason. And in WWF that year, 97 was underrated for WWF too, because Bret Hart was kind of a tweener. You know what I mean? Like before he actually turned heel. And like shit just felt different. I miss those days. Now we can't even now they got the Vault and stuff on YouTube, but we can't even freaking watch the whole thing. I mean, they're uploading it piece by piece. But I would love to watch everything. You know what I'm saying? When DDP turned face, he was the first guy to refuse the NWO, Shreveport, Louisiana in '97, January of '97. Remember when DDP dressed up as La Parka? Oh yeah. When DDP dressed up as La Parka, and nobody knew it. Nobody knew it was DDP until he gives I think it was Savage the diamond cutter, and then he takes the La Parka mask off, and the whole place just, you know. And then this is not from WCW, but this is from the Monday Night Wars. When Tyson showed up in on WWF in March of '98, and Austin and Tyson had their face off. That was another good moment that I loved from the Monday Night Wars. Not just WCW, because, like I said, both companies were firing on all cylinders back then. You know what I'm saying? Like every Raw was something different. You know what I mean? 97, 98, 96, 90, late 96, 97, and 98 were the best years of the Monday Night Wars. Yeah, I stopped when they turned Hogan babyface again. Because I'm like, oh shit, it's over. Man, it's like, and basically around the time, around like March of '98, April of '99 rather. It's like, okay, we're back to '95 again. You know what I'm saying? We're back to babyface Hulk Hogan. Because to me, babyface Hulk Hogan never worked in WCW. You know, it worked in the WWF. It didn't work in WCW. It didn't work in '94. It didn't work in '95. And when he went back to it in '99, it didn't work either. So once they did that, like the NWO was over, I stopped watching. You know, the spontaneity was over. They tried to bring back the NWO 2000, one of the worst fucking abortions ever. Like the silver and black NWO with fucking Jeff Jarrett and right with Jeff Jarrett, and then it's like that's what I picture Russo's 2002 invasion with Bret to be. Like Bret didn't have the charisma he did in '97 in WWF, but other than that, he really didn't have the charisma to lead a faction. He definitely didn't have the cool factor of the NWO. He couldn't be the NWO leader. And when they tried to make him that in 2000 WCW, it's just like, what the hell? You know what I mean? Like, so that was my moment. Finger Poke of Doom. I mean, yeah, it was stupid, but I get where they were going with it. But the whole thing was to have Goldberg run through the entire NWO just to get to Hogan again. But okay, then why build up a babyface NWO? What was the point of that if it was just a swerve all along? It didn't make sense to me. But hey, they didn't. And then when like in 2000, like 99, 2000, when they started to make, when Jeff Jarrett came back around like October, because I stopped watching, but yeah, just when the reunion of the NWO went nowhere. And it's like, why is Hogan in the Wolf Pack? You know, and like if they're gonna reunite, just go back to black and white colors. Hogan started coming out in Jinko jeans, you know, acting like he was a hip hopper and shit. And I'm just like, you know, and like, how is Hulk Hogan in the Wolf Pack? You know, I'm like, you know, like, you know, that's meme where I think it's like, was it Steve Buscemi or one of these actors? Hello, fellow kids. You know, that was like Hulk Hogan in the reunited NWO Wolfpack. Like that was him. You know, and like you're 40 or whatever, 50 plus. Like Hulk Hogan always looked old anyway, like even in WWF. You know, so he's like, "Hello, fellow kids." You know, like, so why are you acting hip hop-ish? Like, what is bringing this on? And then, like, to find out later, what we know that Hogan was like racist, like, you know what I mean, and didn't even like black people. You know, it's like it makes it even more cringe. You know, and then like, and because like I said, I stopped watching around, and that's around the spring was when they changed the logo. That logo was atrocious. That fucking logo around spring of '99 when they changed it. Man, what was that? And then, okay, they bring over Russo and Ferrara in October. So I tuned back in October just to see what Russo and Ferrara was going to do because I read on WrestleZone that leading up to that they were coming over. So I'm like, well, what if Ferrara and Russo are going to do? How are they going to change things? And they made it even worse. You know, and like Buff Bagwell talking about he's going to do the job, and then putting everything on Jeff Jarrett, making Jeff Jarrett the chosen one, like he's Jeff freaking Jarrett, like he's a mid-carder at best. Like Slug Daddy used to say, a Memphis mid-card piece of crap. You know, like how is Jeff Jarrett the guy? Like he just fucking lost to China in a good housekeeping match. You know, and then like the main event that night was, and then remember when they turned Hogan face at Fall Brawl, they tried to turn Sting heel. Like, and you want the fans to boo Sting for fucking up Hulk Hogan with a bat, but for months and months, for years and years, Hogan was a heel. So of course fans are going to cheer that, you know. And then yeah, like the Oklahoma gimmick, that was fucking crazy. And then Dr. Death Steve Williams, a longtime real friend of Jim Ross, is down with that because he blames him for what happened at the Brawl for All. Listen, you signed up for this shit. You signed up for this shit. You should have known that there were better fighters out there than you. You hadn't wrestled a real match in decades. You know what I mean? You can't really blame JR for that. So he goes to WCW and he hooks up with Ed Ferrara doing the Oklahoma gimmick as Ed Ferrara's bodyguard, really low of Dr. Death. You know what I mean? Given that he was JR vouched for him. JR got his ass in WWF. Dr. Death Steve Williams had been a wrestler in the business for more than 10 years, and WWF never even gave him a second look because he wasn't a guy that Vince McMahon would have necessarily been into because he was really vanilla. You know, to be honest. And JR got him in the door, and this is how he repairs JR. It was fucking low. You know, you know what I mean? Like, and then like Oklahoma wins the cruiserweight title. You take from Medusa, you take a division that was, besides the NWO, was the thing that made WCW different. Yeah, I remember that. And so did Jim Cornette. It was the thing that made WCW different, the cruiserweight division, besides the NWO. You take that and you flush it down the toilet by having a woman and a non-wrestler win the belt. Like, this was the division that gave you stars such as Dean Malenko, Rey Mysterio Jr., Eddie Guerrero, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit. These guys. And he flushed the shit down the toilet by putting it on Medusa in Oklahoma. Really. Like, Russo and Ferrara were the two dumbest motherfuckers in the business. The Attitude Era wasn't due to them. The Attitude Era was due to Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon knew what to filter out and what not to filter out. Left to his own devices, Vince Russo is the worst writer / booker in wrestling. The motherfucker is living off off the legacy of 2 years. 2 years you had. And you've managed to con several wrestling companies into believing that you were the best thing since sliced bread. Not saying again that Cornette is any better. I say the best booker in professional wrestling is Vince McMahon. Yeah, Vince only tweaks the details, but really the best booker in professional wrestling or writer in professional wrestling ever is Pat Patterson. Pat Patterson, you could say what you wanted to say about his personal life. I know he probably would have been on the Epstein list if he'd have been rich and famous, more rich and famous than he already was. But, he was very good at what he did. He basically booked the golden era, and he was responsible for a lot in the Attitude Era as well. You know what I mean? So those are the best minds in professional wrestling. Not Russo, not Ferrara, not Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff, another guy. He had 2 years. That's all he really had. 2 years of glory. Once he got rid of the NWO and the NWO ran out of steam, he didn't know where to go from there. Nothing. Bad memories, G.I. Bro, Viagra on a pole match. Remember when they turned Booker T into G.I. Bro? The Filthy Animals was a good idea because it was a good collection of guys, that they weren't pushing. The time to push those guys to the main event was 98. You could have started mixing them in with some of the the top, already main event. Yeah, Judy Bagwell on a forklift. You could have started mixing them in with some of the main event guys that were already established. One good one, when Raven was still there, would have been Raven versus Hogan. I saw that. And that would have been interesting because Hogan's nephew, Horace, was in Raven's flock. So Hogan could have been like, I'm rescuing my dead brother's only son, from this cult. And that would have been a way to turn Hogan into kind of a babyface in a better way than what they did with him and Raven. Make him real, not the cartoonish babyface like Hulkamania shit. Make him like he's really trying to rescue his nephew from a cult. You know what I mean? Like do something like that. Again, make it relatable, make it real. Sting versus Raven was a feud they missed out on. They could have did a lot with Raven. I feel like they dropped the ball with Raven. Raven was a good character. They dropped the ball with Booker T. They did. By the time they pushed Booker T to the main event, he beat Jeff Jarrett. He didn't beat any of the guys that, what I would have did with Booker T was do like similar what they did to DDP. Have the NWO offer him a chance to join the NWO, like the Wolfpack, right? Or whatever. And then like he refuses. And then they just beat his ass, what I mean? And then like now he's in a feud with Kevin Nash, or Conan. But they didn't know where they were going. They didn't know how to elevate these guys. And there were ways to do it. These mid-carders, there were ways to elevate them. Chris Benoit could have worked the program with Bret Hart. They did it when Owen Hart died. That was a one-off. That was cool. But basically, Bret Hart could have reconstituted the Hart Foundation because that's what he was good at, leading a faction like that as the Dungeon. Like he could have had Davy Boy. He already had Davy Boy there. He already had Anvil there. He could have had, instead of his brother, he could have had Jericho and Benoit, and bring them together as a faction. Because the Horsemen, it was done. It was done by then. So Benoit on his own, and then Benoit turns on Bret Hart's faction. Then you start a Benoit Bret Hart feud and have Benoit go over Bret Hart, in a series of matches to establish Benoit as a main eventer. Right? There were ways to do it, ways to move these guys up. What they started to do when Russo came in with Kidman versus Hogan, Kidman doesn't even match Hogan's energy. Like Kidman and Hogan, like where are you getting this from? Like, because when I think Hulk Hogan, I think his ideal opponent is Billy Kidman. That's a dream match everybody was clamoring for. When I think, who would I love to see that's a new wrestler take on Hulk Hogan? Billy fucking Kidman. That's who. And then let's not forget David Arquette winning the World Heavyweight Championship. What the hell? Like, and he actually still brags about this. Like, it's a good thing. David Arquette. To promote a stupid movie that nobody was going to see anyway because it was shitty. Like, the masterpiece that was Ready to Rumble. And remember the Kiss wrestler? Oh my God, Dale Tolberg, the Kiss wrestler. And they put in his contract that he had to win a certain number of matches. Gene Simmons put this in. He had to win a certain number of matches because it was Bischoff's brilliant idea in 1999 to have a pay-per-view at the end of the year in the middle of Times Square. It didn't come to fruition, but that was what Bischoff was planning. With the Kiss wrestler. Yeah, and he's trying to kill Billy Kidman, but he's a babyface, though, right? That's what a babyface does: commits murder. Mr. American Hero committing absolute vehicular homicide. Speaking of the Hummer, remember the Hummer storyline that went nowhere? Who hit Kevin Nash with the Hummer, the mysterious Hummer, when he was tag team partners with Sting? Like, after those 2 years of greatness, WCW just reverted to its original form. What WCW was before the Monday Night Wars, like when they had Cheatham the Midget and they had White Castle of Fear, like they started to do shit like that again, but even worse. And we were all remembered, we had amnesia for 2.5 years of why WCW is WCW. And why Vince McMahon is Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation is the World Wrestling Federation. But I heard something. Imagine this, though, Shinobi. I don't know. This would have probably never happened, but I heard this on Conrad's podcast. That Austin's. I was shocked. My friend called me on the phone. My best friend at the time. He called me on the phone. He said, "Turn on TV." Vince McMahon just bought WCW. I flipped. But I got really excited because I thought he was going to buy everybody. Because Vince McMahon came out that night on the simulcast and he cut a promo. he said, "Who you want to see? Lex Luger, and then Sting, Goldberg." And I'm like, because in wrestling we learn that when something is mentioned, it's gonna happen. That's what we learned for a long time as wrestling fans. We come to expect that. So if something is mentioned, they're alluding to something that's gonna happen because otherwise they wouldn't mention it. So when he's cutting his promo, I'm like, oh shit, these guys are coming over. I want to see how they're gonna be introduced. I know, until last year at the Hall of Fame. You know, and by the way, we're wishing Lex well. You know what I mean? Because he's been sick, you know, according to DDP. He's been hospitalized. You know, Lex. I always like Lex. You know what I mean? I feel like he got a bad rap. Oh, that was one of my favorite episodes too of Nitro. The 100th episode of Nitro in '97 when he beat Hogan. But I feel like Lex Luger's career was like almost was, because he almost was NWA champion. And then when he finally got the WCW title in '91, nobody really cared because they still thought that Ric Flair, people looked at Ric Flair as the the WCW NWA champion. And then he never got any titles in WWF. But when he finally got the title for real in '97 against Hogan, it was in the same building that he was supposed to win it against Yokozuna 4 years before that with WWF championship. So it was the Palace of Auburn Hills. And it was only for a week, you know what I mean? Because he lost it at Real Wild. But it was still sweet. Because like Luger, you know, he was decent. You know what I mean? Like, I hated the way he sold. Usha. You know, he was almost as bad as Foley, but like he was decent. And he, you know, being that Sting was not wrestling, for the people that were wrestling, you know, he was the most over babyface, him and the Giant in '97 that they had. Bischoff did it to pop a rating. And Luger versus Hogan, it was a match that WWF never had the opportunity to give us but I always felt like Lex Luger was always a better heel. And I think WWF could have kept him around longer in '95 if they'd have turned him heel in '94. Instead of what they did where it was a swerve and Tatanka. And I remember arguing with my stepdad about this storyline at SummerSlam '94, where I'm like, Luger's the sellout. Luger took the money. He took the money from Ted DiBiase. He's the sellout. And my stepdad's like, nah, it's Tatanka. And it turned out that it was Tatanka. And then, like, they had the opportunity then to turn Luger heel in WWF again and have him be with DiBiase. And they didn't do it. Luger was always a better heel. Like, he was a natural heel. Oh, yeah. That was in the lead up to fucking Super Bowl 10. Because what happened around that time, Shinobi, was that Kevin Sullivan came back. You know, for a brief time, because they fired Russo, right? And Kevin Sullivan came back. That's why Benoit and the Radicals left, because they were afraid that now they're in the main event, Sullivan's going to bury them. He's just going to go back to Flair versus Hogan, which is what he did. And that's when he had the Yappa Pie strap match. The Yappa Pie, brother. What the hell is a Yappa Pie? Like, I'm a history buff. I love American history. I know a lot of the names of the Native American tribes, but I never heard of the Yappa Pie Native Americans. You know, like that must have been the tribe that Chief Jay Strongbow belonged to. you know, like they never could do a strap match right in WCW ever. Remember Uncensored '95? Hogan's in a strap match with Vader, but he ends up beating Ric Flair. Ric Flair wasn't even in the match. You know what I mean? Like, but yeah, 2000 WCW was just shitty. Benoit wins the title that sold out from Sid. Then they take the title off him the next night. Oh, Sid's comeback. Remember Sid's comeback? Millennium Man? Like, they could have did so much with Sid and Goldberg on Sid's not second, third run in WCW from 99 to 2000, but they did nothing with Sid. You know, I have half the brain that you do. You know, like poor Sid, man. People are always trying to make him look stupid. You know, like even giving him the name Psycho Sid was kind of like he said in shoot interviews later on that he didn't really like that. You know what I mean? Like, that was a way to mock him. Who broke my car? Go. Yeah, man, yeah. And then like the Nitro girls, and then Russo comes into WCW. He takes something really cool and really hip in the Nitro girls, and he makes them all trashy wrestlers. And these girls don't know how to wrestle. These girls don't know how to work. You know, and like they're just fucking cheerleaders. But he had in his mind that because he worked with Sable in WWF, that it could work with every female. And you could just put a woman in there like and just, oh, you're a wrestler now. You know, no, like just leave them as Nitro girls. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I didn't think I forgot about her. Yeah. But and then like they got rid of Bobby Heenan. Like because they wanted a hip MTV feel with so they give us Mark Madden. Yeah, an obese fat ass loudmouth. He reminds me of MTV. You know, like when I think of MTV, I think of Mark Madden. You know. And then they make Mean Gene. Remember this? Shinobi, they made Mean Gene a pervert. You know what I mean? Like Mean Gene would say things to the female. Oh yeah. Yep. And he was also the guy that snitched on Bill Watts. Yeah, he was the guy that snitched on Bill Watts. He was the reason why Bill Watts got fired. Because they heard about Bill Watts' interview in The Torch, the racist comments, and the homophobic comments, but more so the racist comments. And it got back to Hank Aaron, who was higher up in TBS Turner Sports at the time, and that got Watts canned. So maybe that was good because that gave us Bischoff, which gave us, the run. But Madden was just an asshole. Like he didn't have talent. Like Bobby Heenan is Bobby the Brain Heenan. And he was one of the greatest commentators of all time. But they clipped his wings in WCW. I didn't like that. You know what I mean? Like Bobby Heenan wasn't allowed to be Heenan. Heenan had to be Heenan. Heenan had to be. He had to be allowed to do his thing. And he wasn't allowed to do his thing in WCW the way that he should. When he first got there, he was. You know what I mean? Like Bobby Heenan was. But then when they turned him face, Bobby Heenan should never be a baby face. That's one thing. You know what I mean? Like, it was cool with the Hogan thing when Hogan turned heel. Like, he hates Hogan, so that's consistent. But then, like, once Hogan turned back, he's still cheering for Hulk Hogan. Why on the earth would Bobby Heenan ever cheer for Hulk Hogan? You know, and like that's total. Uh, oh, Bobby Heenan, the real guy, Ray Heenan, the real Bobby, was a tremendous. I met him at an autograph signing. He was my hero, even as a heel. He's one of the reasons I studied broadcast. When people said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" I said a broadcast journalist. The reason I knew what a broadcast journalist even was because I knew Bobby Heenan used to say he was one. You know, like in WWF. Oh, what are you? I'm a broadcast journalist. You know, you know what I mean? Like the real Ray Heenan, the real Bobby Heenan was a tremendous guy to fans. Most heels are nice people. Heels in real life are better. Heels in real life are better than baby faces. A lot of the time, baby faces tend to be terrible people, and heels tend to be good people. Just the opposite in real life, the way it is in rest on camera. But Bobby Heenan was a tremendous guy. You know what I mean? Like met him at a lot of fan conventions. You know, also met Scott Hall. Love Scott Hall to death. You know, oh, I heard Jeff. I met Foley too. Foley was cool. He came to my school in 2003, right before I was about to graduate, and he did right before he did the cage match with the ref the cage match between Nash and Triple H at Bad Blood '03. Jeff Jarrett, I imagine Jeff Jarrett looks like an asshole. You know, he's a guy that had everything handed to him from the time he was born as Jerry Jarrett's son, and then as Russo's friend. The guy was never a main eventer. He never drew money. Mike Graham was right. They broke a million guitars over him and he never drew a dime. But then again, coming from Mike Graham, who are you to talk, Mike Graham? You never drew a dime either. You know what I'm saying? But anyway, look, like even a broken clock is right twice a day. You know? Oh yeah, I heard that too, and that disappointed me because he was my favorite. He was my first favorite wrestler. He was the reason I got into wrestling because I started off as a comic book nerd. I liked comic books, so when I saw Hulk Hogan versus the Ultimate Warrior in 1990, I liked it because to me, wrestling back then in the golden era, if you don't remember it, it was like wrestling in the golden era was like a comic book come to life. You know, Hulk Hogan, the Ultimate Warrior, the Macho Man. So Ultimate Warrior was my first favorite wrestler. I had the Tonka, the Wrestle Buddy, the Ultimate Warrior. I had the toy where you pull a string and it says the slogans of the Ultimate Warrior. But yeah, I heard Ultimate Warrior in real life was a total asshole to fans and to other wrestlers. I never got to meet the Macho Man, and I wish I did because eventually he became my favorite wrestler. You know, over time as I started to watch more wrestling, the Macho Man became my guy. You know what I mean? And Stone Cold Steve Austin. Hulk Hogan, not really. And, I know I never did either. When I was approached to do Make a Wish, two celebrities I wanted to meet, Randy Savage and Michael Jackson, and unfortunately I never got to meet either one, and I'll never will. You know, unless when I die. you know. But yeah, I love the Macho Man. You know, Ric Flair's still around, so maybe I'll get to meet him someday. You know what I mean? Because he's another one of my top five. Hulk. I met Undertaker, the Road Warriors, Edge when he was first starting out, China and Triple H, Foley, Scott Hall, Bobby Heenan, and that's pretty much it. You know, and Sasha Banks. I didn't meet her, but I saw her coming out of the Barclays Center in 2015 when she had the Brooklyn NXT Takeover Brooklyn match with um, Bailey. Yeah, Sasha Banks was a bitch because like I had my daughter at the time was with me, and she was a Sasha Banks fan, and I get it, Sasha, just had like a career match or whatever, but we're standing there and we're like, she saw us, and like we're trying to flag her down, Sasha, to sign this autograph, and the bitch just walks off. So I'm like, you know what? Fuck you, you know, you know. And like knowing what, again, like you said about Benoit, knowing what we know now about Sasha, it's like, come on, this bitch is the most entitled bitch in professional wrestling. you, and like she walked out of the company twice. Like Tony Khan must be fucking her because how is he giving out all these championships? Like, you know, he must be sticking it to her. Like I turned on AEW one day. And she hates the fans. Literally hates the fans. Like she considers us basement dwelling virgins that we're like a cancer to get near. Now I know some guys can be creepy, trying to hug and like caress the female wrestlers, but come on, like, you work for the biggest, incel in the entire world, like the textbook incel, Tony Khan. You don't mind taking his money, and he's one of those fans that if he wasn't Tony Khan, you'd have complete disdain for, just based on him. Right, yeah. I get it, yeah. I hate that bitch. You know what I'm saying? Like, fuck her. Like, you wouldn't be anywhere without any of us. And you got your foot in the door because you're Snoop Dogg's niece. And nobody gives a fuck if you're Snoop Dogg niece to begin with because this is not music. But, WWE, like, and then come to find out, you didn't even grow up with fucking Snoop. Like, you know, uh, you met him when you were like later on in life, like, let me see. That's pretty much it. Every other wrestler was pretty much cool. I'd imagine, like, I heard Andre the Giant was kind of like an asshole to people. I never met him, but like, that's what I heard. I heard Sable was a bitch. And like, what did he say about Andre? Was it true? I mean, I get it. Andre was, huge and it was hard to get around, but what I mean? Like, I would have loved to meet the Sheik, the Iron Sheik. Like, because he was just funny as fuck. His real self. But oh no, I take that back. One wrestler that I did meet that was a complete asshole, Brian Knobbs. And this was when I was a kid. Brian Knobbs, right? They're coming out of Madison Square Garden show. This was like in the early 90s. And I had the Brian Knobs toy. And I'm like, hey, Brian Knobs. Like, and he just fucking passes me by again. You know? And I'm like, yeah, that's why you suck, Brian Knobs. You know? So yeah, Brian Knobs has to be it. I heard the nicest guy ever that I ever met. Nobody's ever said a bad word about him. Is Foley. Like I said, Foley sat there when he came to my school, and we had a 15-minute conversation about wrestling. You know what I mean? Like he came there to do a literacy tour. But of course, you're Mick fucking Foley. None of these kids are going to ask about your book, right? The teachers are all like inviting him there to talk to us about literacy, and I'm there raising my hand like a. Oh yeah, Owen Hart, I heard, was a great guy. I loved Owen Hart, man. I never met him, but I loved him as a kid, man. Because like when he stood up to Brett, even though he was a heel, like if you've been a baby brother or a younger cousin, you know what he was feeling, in his brother's shadow. Like that was a real storyline. I kicked your leg out of your leg, Brett. At the Royal Rumble '94, I kicked your leg out of your leg. I know he fucked up, but it was still a cool storyline. I did it, brother. I did it. I beat you. I said I was gonna beat you, and I beat you, brother. When he beat him at WrestleMania 10, Owen was cool, man. He deserves so much better. But yeah, like I'm raising my hand to Foley, and I'm asking him about behind the scenes shit when people didn't really know about behind the scenes shit. But like what was it like to work for Paul Heyman? What was it like to work for Bischoff, Vince? And he's like, you know what? You're one of the smartest, knowledgeable wrestling fans I ever met. And that made me feel good. I'm like, okay, cool. Like, and kids are asking him, like, did it hurt when you fell? Because I didn't ask the conventional question. Like, one of the things I probably knew that he got sick of was hearing people say, did it hurt when you fell from the cell in the. Oh, yeah. Like the Undertaker question. I know he gets sick of that. So I tried to ask him different questions, like his matches with Vader. He's like, wow, nobody ever asked me about my matches with Vader in '93. And I'm like, yeah, I love those. You know what I'm saying? The Lost in Cleveland storyline, it was corny, but like nobody ever asked him about before he was in WWF. So he thought that was cool. he thought that was awesome. Foley's a cool guy, and he's one of the few wrestlers that isn't a conservative. And that's hard to find. I'm not getting into politics, Shinobi, with you, but, like most wrestlers are conservative. You know what I mean? So, and Foley is one of those that isn't. So, I would love to meet Jesse Ventura, but, like, I sense that he would get too much into politics and not want to talk really wrestling. Like he'd be like, well, let me tell you about the time I almost ran for president. And the time I won the governorship of the state of Minnesota. Like, I've always found it funny that this guy, Jesse Ventura, said his gimmick used to be that he was from San Diego, California, but he has the thickest Minnesotan accent ever. Like he sounds like the mom he's so Minnesota that he sounds like the mom from Bobby's World, or like Sarah Palin, even though Sarah Palin's from Alaska, but she sounds like she's from Minnesota too. Like the thickest Midwestern accent ever, Jesse Ventura. But we're supposed to believe he's from San Diego, California. Gorilla. I would have loved to have met Gorilla Monsoon too. I heard he was a nice guy. I want to meet Cornette before he dies, just to have a conversation with Jim Cornette, because the amount of knowledge this guy has about professional wrestling, like he's a walking encyclopedia. The day that Jim Cornette dies, man, we will have lost the Yoda of professional wrestling the day that Jim Cornette dies. He wasn't such a great booker in Smoky Mountain or in OVW. I didn't really see his stuff in OVW, but his knowledge of wrestling, his historical knowledge of wrestling is just tremendous. You know, and like I could sit there and talk with Cornette for hours. You know, just learning from this guy. You know, him and Heyman are kind of similar. Heyman, though, is a visionary. Heyman, like that's why this faction fits him, the vision, more than Seth Rollins, because he's a visionary. Heyman looks forward. Like you could talk to Heyman about wrestling that he hasn't even happened yet or is going to happen in the future. But Cornette is the historian. You know, Heyman is different. He doesn't like history a lot. You know, he doesn't like talk about the past that much or reflect on the past. You know, part of it is like his family was Holocaust survivors and stuff. You know what I mean? So he has a forward-thinking mind. Whereas Cornette is kind of on the past, but they're similar in a sense. You know, I met Bruce Pritchard. He was a pretty cool guy when I met him. I met Conrad. Conrad, you know, was an asshole too. Conrad. He's not even a fucking wrestler, and he's an asshole. Because like I went backstage at one of their shows in 2017 rather, when they came to the Gramercy Theater in New York, and I had this beer, and like they would do the gimmick. It's Miller time, so I had a Miller Light beer, so I wanted to do the gimmick with him. So like it's Miller time, and this motherfucker turns his back on me, and I'm like, okay, wow, you just left me hanging. Fuck you, Conrad. And now I listen to the show, and I used to listen to that shit fucking religiously when they would come on every Friday from like 2016 when I discovered it to 2017 after that happened. And then now I listen to it, it's unlistenable. It's all fucking commercials. Like, how many Blue Chew ads do you fucking need, bro? Like, just tell us you can't get your dick hard anymore. You know, like, come on, dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got a million fucking podcasts. You know, like, you know, and you think you're the star. Like, you think people actually come to these shows to see you. You know, when you're a freaking nobody. And like your podcast, after Bruce Pritchard went back to WWE, the podcast became unlistenable because again, he tried this because he thinks he's the star, so he slides fucking JBL in there, and JBL is insufferable. I never understood why anybody likes JBL. He was other than the APA, he sucked as a wrestler, he sucked as a commentator. He sucks as a podcaster. He just sucks all around. You know. So they slide JBL in there. And like How do you feel about this guy's podcast, Shinobi? Kevin Nash. I've never met him, but like, and when he first got a podcast, I was like, yo, this podcast is gonna be awesome. I'm gonna love this podcast. It's Kevin Nash. Um, you know, I liked him ever since he was Diesel in WWF. I loved him in the NWO. He's gonna really tell some good wrestling stories, be funny. He's just one of the most boring podcasts ever. Like, this guy will sit here and go on for 10 minutes talking about shit that has nothing to do with wrestling and nobody asked him his opinion about, like Israel Palestine. You know what I mean? Like, and granted, outside of wrestling, that's one of the topics I love to talk about. That's a very big feature on my channel. But at the same time, I don't want to hear Kevin Nash's opinion on it. I don't want to hear Kevin Nash drone on for an hour about how he hates Donald Trump, you know? Like, and then sit there and go, breathe into the mic like he's Darth Vader. Come on, dude. You know what I'm saying? Like, we tune into wrestling to hear wrestling podcasts, there are wrestling stories. Kevin Nash is one of the worst podcasts ever. Yeah. Hey, what's up, man? So his podcast sucks. Kevin Nash. I would have loved to have had Hogan. Why didn't anybody try to get a podcast with Hogan going? You know, when he was alive. That would have been cool. You know? But I mean, it would have been full of lies, but you know, the closest we had was that episode of Joe Rogan that he did. You know? What about you, Shinobi, if you're still there? What are some of you guys' favorite podcasts that wrestlers do? I don't really like Undertakers either. Like, not really a fan. Especially when he brought Michelle McCool on that fucking, like, okay, like, she's your wife, but what? Like, she sucks as a co-host. It reminds me of when Cornette had that girl, Alice. You know, with that annoying NPR voice that knew nothing about wrestling before he had Brian Last. I wish Bobby Heenan was still alive and able to talk with podcasting. Like I said, he would have had him and Gene. They could have him and Gene, if they were alive and they had podcasting, they could have had a podcast. Gene Oakland and Bobby Heenan. I mean, that would have been hilarious. Or Bobby Heenan and Monsoon, the primetime podcast. You know, just because like the shoot interviews that Bobby Heenan did, like the RF video shoot interview that Bobby Heenan did in 2002. I mean, that was, it was funny. I hate Booker T's podcast too. Booker T's podcast is just shilling for WWE. And Disco Inferno, the one Disco Inferno does with Conan. Anyway, guys, that's all. But that's all. Thank you guys for contributing, Shinobi. Or the other David, thank you guys, man. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.